It's 2 in the morning and I can't sleep. My mind won't stop racing. If I can just get it down, just get this confession down as best as I can, then maybe I can rest without seeing you in my dreams, archivist. So, about me. I was born and raised in what you'd know as Sydney, Australia, even though it's really the lands of the Bidjigal people. I've always cared for environmental issues ever since I was a kid. I ended up studying environmental science at university. Most people have some idea that we've been messing the world up, but they don't know just how deeply and thoroughly screwed we are. The changes humanity is bringing about are completely unique in the history of life on Earth. Changes in the composition of the atmosphere that normally take millennia are happening in mere decades. We've already crossed so many tipping points and thresholds. Runaway climate change is quite unavoidable. By mid-century, the ocean will have more plastic than fish in it. The pollutants and radiation we create will outlive our civilization 100 times over. Learning all this really galvanized me into the climate activist movement. I went on marches and raised funds and talked to politicians. I even paddled in a kayak in a flotilla to blockade a coal port. I was so full of passion then. I had a mind full of if only. If only people knew, if only we could make them care, if only the powers that be could be forced to change. It all seems rather naive now. After uni, I found a job in ecological restoration, replacing invasive plants with native species, surveying wildlife, measuring erosion and water quality. It can be frustrating, exhausting, bureaucratic, but at the end of the day I could come home knowing I was doing something worthwhile with my time. I was having a positive impact. Normally my colleagues are pretty like-minded and that really helps with morale. But there was this one guy, Jaden, who was such a pain in the ass. The wrong kind of hippie. Caucasian dreadlocks, a faint smell of weed and a tendency to the conspiratorial. Skeptical about vaccines and the moon landings and fluoride in the tap water, you name it. How someone who believes such nonsense got into this field, I have no idea. One lunch break I got into a massive argument with the guy after he told me that he thought climate change was a hoax. Said I was a globalist shill when I tried to point out how wrong he was. I avoided him like the plague after that. If we were on shift together, I kept things strictly necessary, professional communication. Some people just aren't worth the effort. But weirdos aside, I was pretty content working in the outdoors, making a difference. But the fires changed all that. It was the summer of 2019. We get big regional wildfires some years in this country, but never like that. Over the course of the summer, this huge wave of fires just swept down the whole east coast from north to south. Every single national park and state forest, anywhere with vegetation to burn, burned. Eventually Sydney was surrounded. Fires rose to the north, west and south of us. We all just had to hunker down and wait as the sky filled with smoke. All day and all night. For weeks. Sometimes it would ease off to a faint grey haze, and then the winds would change and the sky would become a dark, dirty yellow that had us all hiding indoors and filling hospitals with suffering asthmatics. I was driving home from work one afternoon, following the curve of Botany Bay and watching as the smoke started rolling back in again. The traffic slowed to a creep, headlights dim and bluish in the dirty yellow smog. I saw the silhouettes of buildings against the sky, looking like every sci-fi dystopian city you can think of. I started to cry then. This was it. Everything we'd been warned about, everything I'd learned about. It had all seemed distant and theoretical till then, but here it was, happening right in front of me. All the talk of cutting carbon and reducing footprints and offsets and rewilding. It's pointless. Just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It took me a while to realize I couldn't see the lights of the other cars anymore. The sounds of the traffic had disappeared. It was just my own car slowly crawling along in the smog. The little I could see of the road surface ahead was getting more and more cracked and uneven. I thought I must have somehow made a wrong turning onto a side street without noticing. I slowly and carefully pulled over and stopped. I had no idea where I was. The GPS on my phone couldn't find a connection. I watched the signal bars drop. 4, 3, 2, 1. No signal. Already shaken, I decided to just stay where I was until the smog eased off a bit. I turned on the radio. Maybe I'd learned something useful from the news or the traffic report, but every station was just static. I thought maybe I was next to a pylon or something causing interference, but it was impossible to know. Dejected and alone, I stared out the window into the smog, waiting. It was about half an hour until it started to ease a little. The yellow-grey retreating and revealing old tarmac and pavement, the shapes of shipping containers. Eventually the silhouettes of cranes too, like giant metal giraffes. I must have driven somewhere near the port. Then something else appeared in the retreating smog, maybe 10, 20 meters in front of me, seemingly sticking out of the middle of the road. A tree. Like a broad, gnarled fig tree with sprawling buttress roots. Where the hell was I? I put on my dust mask, for all the good it did me, and stepped out of the car. As I approached the tree, I suddenly realized it must have been some sort of sculpture. Bleached white driftwood held together with plastic cables and rusty wire, all so cleverly woven together that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The leaves hung limp in the still air and had the colour and texture of black bin bags. Was this some kind of new public art installation I'd driven into? Whoever had made it had thought of every last detail. They even had flowers, like white plastic straws cut lengthways in 4 strips and curled up. They even had tiny metal pins for stamens. Then I saw the insects. I watched a bee land on one delicate plastic flower, except it wasn't a bee. Tiny silver legs hanging from a body like a delicate knot of wire and plastic bristles, with a tiny propeller on top. I watched the little metal creature crawl into the flower and then emerge, dusted with silver pollen, then whir away into the smog. I couldn't understand how anyone could have made such a thing. It was so strange but beautiful. It made me want to retrieve my phone from my car and take a picture. I turned around only to find half a dozen birds had landed on my car. They looked maybe like big ravens with scraggly black feathers with this oily sheen. They had large hooked beaks, more like that of a parrot, which they were using to attack my car. One was pulling at a windscreen wiper while another was chipping at the corner of a wing mirror. There are some parrots that will pull man-made objects apart for fun, but this was something else. I watched a bird pull a long strip of rubber from the seal of a window and then throw back its head and eat it, like a pelican with a fish. They were descending on my car like vultures on a carcass. I ran back to try and stop them, only to watch one of them sink its talons into the front right tyre, letting the air out with a hiss. They must have been strong to do that. I yelled at them to get away, waving my hands at them. I assumed I could shoo them away like seagulls at a picnic, but instead they all froze. For a long second they were perfectly still. Then their heads turned as one, with an unnaturally smooth movement, to look at me. Their eyes were the worst thing. They glowed like little green LED lights. We're also used to the idea that a small animal, when it sees an angry human running at it, will turn and run away. So when something refuses to follow the script, when it turns around and calls our bluff and fixes us with a disturbingly intelligent gaze, that is a unique moment of dread. The birds screamed. They sounded like seagulls, but muffled, like sound out of an old tannoy or through a metal tube. Some ancient parts of my brain made a very quick recalculation, and I turned and ran. I spotted a hole in one of the old rusty shipping containers and dived for it. I shrieked as I felt a sharp talon scrape the back of my scalp before I made it through into what I hoped would be shelter. Evidently the birds didn't think I was worth chasing in there, because I heard their fluttering wings and metallic shrieking slowly fade away. Still, it was a long while before I dared leave my hiding place. Warily I emerged from the container and, looking around me, started back in the direction of my car. I'd lost my dust mask fleeing from the birds. Scalp injuries tend to bleed a lot, and there was blood seeping down the back of my neck now. The sky was still a dusty yellow-grey, and things were hazy in the distance, but I could see ahead of me well enough. I've never had the best sense of direction, but I could have sworn I was going the right way. The usual bushfire smoke smell had developed an acrid, unnatural undertone. Faint but persistent smells of diesel, burnt plastic and rusty metal were making me a little queasy. I'd been walking far too long already through the maze of shipping containers, barrels, piles of tires, rusted metal debris, and more strange trees. Their hazy shadows were slowly lengthening in the weakening afternoon sun, which worried me. But I was then relieved to see 3 human shadows on the ground ahead of me. 3 people must have been stood around the corner. Thank God I wasn't alone in this place. I called out hello as I approached. Hopefully they'd be able to help me, but as I turned the corner I felt my stomach drop. There was no one there. Just 3 dark patches on the cracked pavement. Human silhouettes on the ground with nothing to cast them. I stared at them dumbly for a long while, touched them as if that would tell me anything. As I kept walking, I realized there were more scattered here and there, on the ground and the sides of the containers and against crumbling concrete walls. I decided that I was definitely not going to think about the implications of those shadows. Better to keep moving. Since I'd lost a car, I thought I should try walking south towards the waterfront. Then I should be able to get my bearings. Keeping the sun on my right, I made my way through the metal and concrete landscape. I don't know exactly when I first felt like I was being watched. The subtle itch up the back of my spine that told me I was being observed. In that empty, smoggy place, the only sound was the distant rush of the sea. The sudden, faint, creaking, scraping sound behind me made me jump. Something like the sound of an old rusty metal gate opening. Of course, it could have been something creaking in the wind, or maybe it was those birds. I hurried on for a few minutes until I heard the sound again. A regular metallic creaking, distinctly coming from behind me. I froze, and it stopped. I started walking again, and it started again. I walked faster and faster, and then broke into a jog and a sprint, and I realized the creak, 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 creak was matching the rhythm of my footsteps. The foul, smoggy air was making me puffed out and nauseous quickly. I had to slow down and stop, my heart pounding away, and a horrible realization came to me. I had seen the metal and plastic trees and insects and birds. If this was an ecosystem with plants, pollinators and scavengers, then wouldn't it also have predators? Tired as I was, I started to pick up speed again. I glanced behind me. Nothing but concrete and shipping containers disappearing into the smog. And then something dashed across my vision, too far for me to see clearly. A grey silhouette in the smog, moving between one hiding place and another. I couldn't tell you how big it was, but it was larger than a person. I couldn't say what shape it was exactly, but it had more than 4 legs, and was accompanied by that same metallic noise. I started to run again. Glancing to my left down an alley, I saw another silhouette dash across the gap between metal walls. Was it the same creature, or were they a pack? Definitely too many legs, with too many joints. I could hear the sound of the sea now. I didn't know if reaching the water would help, but I had nowhere else to run. I felt a rush of air above me. I'd swear something had left over my head, but I wasn't going to stop and look. I was reaching the end of the maze of containers. Suddenly I was out into a huge open concrete space. It must have been the waterfront. 6 giant cranes loomed over me, the tops of them disappearing into the smoggy sky. The ground was cracked and subsiding in places. The water reached right up to the feet of the cranes, washing back and forth with an oily sheen and bits of brown foam floating in it. One of the cranes had fallen and was lying half in the water, like the skeleton of a colossal beached whale. A long rusty metal pier stuck out into the water, maybe an old fuel loader for container ships. I had an urge to climb up somewhere, some old primate instinct that upwards meant safety. Up a ladder and along the pier, taking care to dodge the rusted-out holes through which I could see the murky, polluted seawater. I kept checking behind me, but maybe my pursuers had decided I wasn't worth it. I reached the end of the pier and, exhausted, sat staring out at the oily, murky bay, the smog haze reddening in the evening. There was a long piece of wreckage sticking out of the water nearby, metal girders like part of an old pylon. One of the black birds had landed on it. It was carrying some unidentifiable scraps back to what I took for a nest there. In spite of my fear, I couldn't help wondering what the offspring of such a creature would look like. I squinted, trying to get a good look. Coiled up cables, wires, plastic bags formed the structure of the nest. I couldn't see what was inside, but I did see the softer materials had been woven with something more rigid to give it support. I saw the end of a socket sticking out and realized it was bone. The nest had been woven with bone, and at that distance, well, it could have been any kind of bone, I told myself, even as I caught a glimpse of jaw and fragment of skull and knew, without needing to see more, that it was human. I knew then what this place was. This was what the world would become once we'd all destroyed ourselves. Climate change, nuclear war, bioweapons, all of it was going to happen, and the world left behind would be unrecognizable. Out of our refuse, this polluted, ruined world would evolve new life, strange and twisted, half living on the scraps of the old world and half made out of it. And yet, it was still life. Yes, it was alien and frightening, but only because I was a stranger to it. To these creatures, it was home. Life, ever persistent, would be rid of our stupid, destructive species once and for all, and in the wreckage of our civilization, new ecosystems would adapt and flourish. This was the end of my world, but the start of something new. Despite my fear and exhaustion, I felt hope within me, like I had never felt before. Behind me, I heard that metallic creaking again. I turned to see a shadow moving in the smog towards me, many jointed limbs and 2 glowing green eyes. I turned back to stare at the oily, murky water where unknown dark shapes moved. I made a choice, and I jumped. Let me tell you, it's disorientating to wake up shivering in the middle of the night on the beach. You get strange looks from passers-by on the long walk home under the street lights, dodging the late-night traffic. And when you finally stumble through your own front door, salt crusty and smelling of smoke, your frightened and angry partner will have a lot of questions. At least before he realizes you're too freaked out to answer him and he goes to run you a hot bath. I suppose I could say my statement ends here, but I know you won't leave me alone till you get it all. I can feel that damned eye looking at me. The thing was, even though I'd found myself back home, I never quite left that place. If I turned my head just so, I could almost smell the smog, almost hear the wind rustling plastic leaves on metal trees, almost get a glimpse of that fuzzy yellow-grey light. 6 months after that strange night, my funny turn, as my partner calls it, things changed for me again. I was at work on a post-fire recovery study in the Blue Mountains, and as luck would have it, I was stuck with Jaden the whole day, trying to record observations while listening to him blather on. Apparently an activist had been caught that day blocking the harbour bridge to protest fossil fuels. It had been on the news that morning, and Jaden was bothered by it. I mean, why would you do that? Such a selfish attention seeker. I'd be so angry if she'd done that to me. This whole global warming thing turns people crazy. It's all just a hoax anyway. On and on and on. I was trying to get on with my work and just let him monologue until he said, I mean, what was she so afraid of anyway? That's when something in me snapped, and I decided to show him. He survived, you know. Not all the ones after him did, but Jaden survived. They found him a week later, hiding in a skip bin. He'd suffered smoke inhalation and chemical burns and was babbling about metal monsters. So that's all you get from me now, Dreamwalker. I've told you more than I ever told anyone. Be satisfied and go. Take this as a friendly warning. You may think the distance between us can keep you safe, but those who come after us can find you wherever you are. Get out of my head. Let me rest. Do not make me show you the world without us. Statement ends.